Hey, Ygret 1990 here today to talk about one of my favorite light novels, which is called Ygret, or Ygret the Sage. Ygret, Y-G-R-E-T, is a light novel that has 59 chapters. The main character is a character named Ygret, who was a sage who has reincarnated. You'll notice I like a lot of reincarnation, either mangas or light novels. The character reincarnates into the body of a prince whose name is Judas Reverin Arcadian. I destroyed the last two names, obviously. Let's call him Ygret, or Y. Was a 93-year-old sage who could use spirits, specifically four elements: wind, earth, water, and fire. This is one about magic, more specifically the spirits. He was a commoner who gained great fame. He eventually died and then reincarnated into the body of a 14-year-old prince named Judas Reverin Arcadian. The first 20 to 30 chapters, first season essentially, is him about kind of figuring out his role in this boy's body and ultimately realizing through the help of the spirits that it is his body, it just due to the way the body was created. So the emperor, Judas's father, wanted a son. His mother was having trouble, and so they used alchemy to essentially create the boy through DNA. I mean, he was still born, but at first it was like essentially they forced it. And so part of the story is him figuring, well, is it me, or is it me, my soul, just possessing this boy? And at the end of the first season, he eventually realized, hey, this is his body. He did reincarnate. Just through the process of the alchemy, it took him a while to actually for his soul to come present in the body. And so it starts off with him being frail. He's known as the Ygret Prince, pretty much because he's been quiet, shy as another line. It's because, again, his soul wasn't really in the body. And so through this, he's weak. He starts to regain his power. For that, he summons or calls first his first spirit, which is the wind, also known as Uni, cute little female wind spirit. And then later on, he calls Tony, who's a male earth spirit, and he is attending an academy known as Reuben Academy. So it's essentially an academy for nobles. He is the first prince, one of three children. Each one has a different mother. His mother died due to the interference of the current empress. She has a son as well. She wants him to be in power, and that's kind of the main point of the season. Two, I mentioned a third brother. Pretty much, he has a third brother from another woman, which they don't really talk about a lot. And so, going back to the academy, Judas is Y is attending the academy, and he ends up being paired up with Eden for swordsmanship. All the people attending this academy are nobles, either high ranking or low. He ends up being bullied by a guy named Michael Drake, who later on eventually becomes his friend. Because at this point, he's hiding a lot of his powers. People still don't see him really as respectful, strong. And so he goes on a journey essentially with Eden and another girl, noble, Christina, to get his actions, like your true name, say, hey, this is who you are, and he gets Ygret. And within that process, he ends up three of them end up running into Michael, who is working with Freed, who essentially is a dark magic practitioner. He was actually a student of Ygret. And so they have a little scuffle. They end up going back to the academy where Michael's kind of detained, but then they let him go. And at this point, Y is starting to get more confidence, so particularly because now he's got friends, Eden and Christina, and they encourage him, particularly Christina, to kind of show his powers a little. So he ends up on his final exams, ends up doing really well. He gets the first place. And this leads to either good things or bad things, where there's some kids who are jealous and frustrated all of a sudden now that he's showing his powers, or just an intellect. He's coming out of a shell. And so they decide to essentially damage the chandelier to try to hurt him. chandelier falls. It's about to hit some other students. Eden, Y's friend, jumps in. Y uses his wind spirit to push him there and kind of help him. And then everyone thinks, oh, Eden, you're the hero. While this is going on, Y disappears and goes and confronts the 3 students who essentially tried to hurt him. He goes by himself, he confronts them, and as they're about to push him, say, hey, you don't got power, what's the big deal? What are you going to do? Ygret, Prince, making fun of him. His friend Christina appears. And she essentially says, hey, don't you think you guys who are about to hit him are getting a little full of yourself? The main leader is like, no, this is ridiculous. You guys don't know anything. And then he pushes Christina. She falls off the balcony. At this point, Y jumps over. He calls forth his 3rd spirit, which is the spirit of water, also known as Looney. Looney is a wolf spirit. I think that's cute. Wonderful design. I like the character. And so as they're falling, Y has them enveloped with Uni's powers, which is essentially a circular ball of water. They lower themselves to ground. At this point, everyone's seen. And Y essentially says, hey, these 3 kids tried to hurt me because they didn't recognize me as royalty, as the prince. At this point, then he uses the wind spirit Uni to summon them. The guards are there. They take them away. And at this point, people start to recognize him as Y is having powers. And so the next day, there's one character in particular, Margin, who essentially shows up. He is the son of a noble, high-ranking, and he essentially is trying to use Y at the beginning. So he shows up, he's like, hey, I want to be your friend. And Y's like, okay. Other people are trying. He's like, no. He puts a very thin line between him and his friends and other people who are trying to use him for his powers. Season 1 essentially goes where Y befriends another character who is a spiritualist who is from the desert of Turk, whose country essentially were destroyed by Freed. And so Y goes, they kind of see the ruins. Y goes off by himself as his friends are still so all of his friends go with him. Margin, Eden, and Vicol and Christina. And so while they're kind of seeing what happened, Freed appears, and Freed kind of says, hey, Y, what's your connection to the sage Ygret? And at this point, he pulls out a stone that has the fire spirit, Carney, trapped. And so apparently when you call a spirit and they don't come, mana rejection. So Y had tried to call her until he's bleeding. That was exactly what Freed appeared. And so then Y's like, hey, what did you do to Carney? And Freed's like, only Ygret would know her name. So he's like, does that mean you are Ygret? And at this point, Freed's holding tightly on the spirit, try to use her against Ygret. He calls her 2 to 3 times, and finally she comes to him, and the stone breaks. And at this point, Freed realizes, hey, this is the sage. So Y fights him with the wind spirit, and specifically the earth spirit. The other spirits are there as well, but those 2 main spirits. They damage Freed. He's actually using a vessel, golem, you could say. It falls apart, and he says, hey, I'll see you next time. And this essentially ends with, the scene ends essentially with Y going back to his friends. They see he's damaged. They ask if he's okay. He's like, no, it's fine, we go. They continue on to the royal palace using transportation magic. They get there, the people in the palace, so his father had summoned him because they heard of the change. The servants are surprised that he actually brought friends with him. And so during this, he has a meeting with the Empress, who's not his mother, the second prince's mother, Sage. And she essentially offers him a cup of tea. She's like, hey, how are you doing? And he uses the wind spirit to destroy the tea, because it's later found out that the tea his mother had been given by the Empress was drugged, and so it caused her mental illnesses, and she eventually committed suicide because she couldn't handle it. So apparently this is big trauma on Y's body, his current body, aka Judas. And so he leaves his talk with the Empress. He goes back. There is an assassin. He defeats the assassin. So actually, sorry, this was before he met the Empress. So he defeated the assassin. He met with his friends who found out he had been attacked, and then he met with the Empress after, essentially. And so then he essentially kind of accused her, hey, of poison. He's like, I'm not going to hide anymore. And so it was either before this or shortly after, he essentially used the water spirit Uni to go in his mind and truly find out what happened. And so his mother essentially had been accused of using alchemy to create him, which she didn't, but the emperor did. And so the fact that she was accused, the empress was like, she was worried. And so she was like, they're going to hurt my son. And so she's like, well, just the accusation alone is enough. So I want you to drink this poison and I'll let it go. And so the poison causes seizures and other stuff and her hallucinations, and she starts attacking her son. She doesn't want to hurt Judas, so eventually she takes her own life. And this helps Y realize, hey, this is my body at this point. So this was my mom, and it was the Empress who was the evil one. So at this point, he leaves, and that's the end of, he goes and meets the Emperor, and then tells the Emperor, I want to become the prince, because he realizes at this point he has to, in order to protect himself and his friends. At this point, essentially, he leaves, goes back to the academy. Season 1 ends. Season 2 starts up with one of his old apprentices. So he had 2 apprentices, Freed and this other god, Khan. And Khan essentially ends up figuring out Judas is his old master, Y. That's kind of where the story ends with, or the story is currently at 59 chapters. They just had a past chapter this last week. So this is July 14th, 2022. So literally this chapter just came out, 59 chapters. And that's where I leave you with Ygret, the Great Sage, a light novel that I particularly enjoy. Thank you. This is Jolly Green, 1990, signing out.